How to specify prefix for all controllers in Spring Boot. This follows the same teaching style as your earlier Spring Boot topic. Introduction. In Spring Boot applications, each controller usually defines its own request mapping. Example: REST controller, @request mapping, users, public class, user controller. But in real-world APIs, you often want a common prefix for all controllers, such as API, v1, app, internal, so that all endpoints look like API, period, API, orders, API, products. This leads to a very common question. How can we specify a global prefix for all controllers in Spring Boot? This is important for API versioning, v1, v2, clean URL structure, microservices design, separating public and internal APIs. This topic helps learners understand different ways to add a global prefix, when to use each method, best practices for API design. This is a very practical Spring Boot REST design concept. What does global prefix mean? A global prefix means adding a common base path to all controller endpoints. In simple terms, global prefix equals path added before every controller mapping. Example concept: controller path, users, global prefix, API. Final URL, API, users. Why this is important. Without a global prefix, users, orders, products. With a prefix, API, users, API, orders, API, products. Benefits: cleaner API structure, easier versioning, consistent routing, easier gateway integration. Method 1. Using server.servlet context path. The simplest way is to set a context path. Application.properties, server.servlet.context path. Now all endpoints are prefixed. API-users, API-orders. How it works. This applies to the entire application. All endpoints, including static content, get prefixed. Example concept: server base path equals API means everything runs under API. When to use this. Use this when you want a prefix for the entire app. You don't need fine control, simple setups, limitation. It affects controllers, actuator, endpoints, static resources. Example concept: everything under API, not just controllers. Method 2. Using @request mapping on base controller, manual way. You can manually add a prefix to each controller. REST controller, @request mapping, API users, public class user controller. Example concept: prefix added manually means repetitive but simple. Limitation: repetitive code, error-prone, not scalable. Method 3. Using WebMvcConfigurer, best flexible approach. This is the most recommended approach for real-world applications. Example: @configuration, public class webconfig, implements WebMvcConfigurer. Override: public void configure path match configurer, configurer, add path prefix, API, class is annotation present, REST controller, class. How it works. Spring checks all controllers. If class has @REST controller, prefix/API is added automatically. Example concept: controller detected means prefix applied, means final endpoint created. Result: users means API users. Orders means API orders. Advantages applies only to controllers, no repetition, clean and maintainable, flexible filtering. Method 4. Prefix only selected controllers. You can apply prefix to specific controllers. Example: configurer, add path prefix, WAPI, class.getPackageName.starts with com myapp.api. Example concept: only controllers in specific package means get prefix. Method 5. API versioning prefix. You can combine prefix with versioning. Configurer, add path prefix, API v1, class.is annotation present, REST controller class. Example concept: versioned API means API/API/v1/users. Method 6. using Spring Boot actuator path. Special case for actuator endpoints. Management.endpoints.web.basepath equals actuator. Example concept. Actuator endpoints get separate prefix. Comparison of methods. Method scope flexibility. Use case context path. Entire app. Low simple apps. Manual. At request mapping per controller. Low small apps. WebMvcConfigurer. Controllers only. High best practice. Package-based prefix selective. High large apps. Example full setup controller. At rest controller. At request mapping. Users. Public class. User controller. Get mapping. Public string. Get users. Return users list. Then you'll configure. Configuration public class webconfig implements WebMvcConfigurer. Override public void configure path match configurer. Add path prefix /API. Class is annotation present REST controller class. Result get API users environment-based prefix. You can externalize prefix. API prefix equals API. Then at value $API.prefix private string prefix and apply it dynamically. Example concept. Config-driven prefix means flexible deployment. Common use cases. API versioning, v1, v2, microservices routing, gateway integration, separating internal APIs/internal, multi-tenant routing. Common mistakes. 1. Using context path when only controllers need prefix. Affects everything, unintentionally. 2. Hard-coding prefix in every controller. Leads to duplication. 3. Forgetting actuator endpoints. They may not follow the same prefix. 4. Mixing multiple prefix methods. Can cause confusing URLs. Best practice. Best practice is use WebMvcConfigurer for controller-level prefix. Use context path only for global app-level prefix. Use versioning/v1 for APIs. Keep prefix consistent across services. Example concept. Clean API structure means easier maintenance and scaling. Advantages: consistent URL structure, easier API versioning, better maintainability, clean controller code, flexible configuration. Challenges: choosing correct method, avoiding duplicate prefixes, managing versioning changes, debugging unexpected URL mappings. Concepts learned in this topic. By learning this topic, you understand what a global prefix is, different ways to add prefix, when to use each method, how WebMvcConfigurer works, how to apply prefix selectively, best practices for API design. Simple definition. Global prefix for controllers. A base path added to all controller endpoints in a Spring Boot application to standardize API URLs. Final summary. To add a prefix for all controllers in Spring Boot, the best approach is configurer.add path prefix -API/class.is annotation present REST controller.class. Key ideas. Global prefix helps organize APIs. WebMvcConfigurer is the most flexible solution. Context path affects entire application. Use prefixes for versioning and structure. Once you understand this, you can design cleaner and more scalable REST APIs in Spring Boot.